Hi, I'm Anya. I'm a fine photographer based in Brooklyn, New York. I specialize in on-location, surrealistic, and conceptual portraiture, and I strive to tell imaginative stories through my art. I never just take a photo. I always use photography as a way of collecting material to create something that is not possible to capture. That is why installations, props, and Photoshop manipulation help me embody my fantasies into a finished piece of artwork. You've probably heard everyone say there are multiple ways of doing things in Photoshop, and that is true. So today I invite you to join me and learn how to bring your editing to the next level. I will share my approach to retouching, show you how to stop using just one tool, and explore the possibilities of Photoshop beyond just clone stamp. I will show you different ways of removing and covering things up, filling and transforming the space, working with healing brushes, patch tool, content or web fill, etc. I will cover some approaches to help you improve your speed, accuracy, and creativity in Photoshop. I'm going to start with some basics. Here's our first photograph we're going to work on. And here are a few elements that I like to remove. Things like little bright spots on the installation and on the ground. Things that don't necessarily belong there, like this part on the installation, this bright line there, the pipe, signs on the building, people on the bicycles, and these bright areas on the building. So basically anything that doesn't belong on your image or too distracting from your main subject. Let me delete this layer. Removing things in Photoshop actually means covering them up and generating pixels on top. And before I start retouching, I'd like to create a layer copy or a blank layer on top. I can't stress enough about the importance of working with separate layers and masks. I highly recommend keeping your editing as non-destructive as possible. It is important when I edit because I want to make sure that if I look at my image later, or I change my mind, or I make a mistake, or I just simply want to change anything, I need to make sure that I can still do that. So let's create a new empty layer by clicking this icon down here. And now I can grab a tool. I'd like to start with one of my favorite tools, which is Spot Healing Brush. Before I start editing on a blank layer with pretty much any tool that generates pixels, make sure that you have Sample All Layers box checked, meaning Photoshop will use and sample information from all visible layers. And for the Spot Healing Brush, I recommend using Content Aware, which means it will use the surroundings that make sense. The cool thing about Spot Healing Brush is that you just paint over an area telling Photoshop that's what I want to remove. I don't need to select source area. Photoshop automatically analyzes the image and generates the pixels covering things up. So I don't need to do pretty much anything, just brush over. It is normal to go over things a few times. And now all my retouching, all my pixels that I created to cover things up are on a separate layer. Let's turn it on and off. Let's remove this bright square right here. I find that Spot Healing Brush works amazingly with small areas, but with larger it can be hit and miss. So maybe we should try and use other tool that would be a better choice, like regular healing brush. Regular healing brush works the same way, but now you get to set the sample area yourself, and sometimes it can be very useful. When working on a blank layer, you need to set your healing brush to current and below, and it will sample from the current layer and all visible layers that are below. So I hit Alt and select my source and paint. Now let's remove this vibe here. Again, I hit Alt, select the source, and I paint over. Well, they don't quite work out well. So for this particular case, I might consider another tool such as Patch Tool. Let's hit Ctrl+Z to undo. With Patch Tool, you select the area that needs to be removed. Just like that. Doesn't have to be perfect or accurate. And again, you choose the area to sample by dragging your selection, but before I do that, I need to change my patch tool settings to content aware. Make sure that I have sample all layers box checked. Then you move with your cursor, you click and drag, align the lines, and release. The cool thing about patch tool is that it allows you to change the settings after you used it. So while I still have my selection, I can go to settings such as structure and color and experiment with those. So let me lower my structure to, let's say 1. And as I do that, it updates the results. CTRL+D to deselect. You might need to go over a few times again. Let's try removing this square sign. And again, I select and I drag to my source area. The higher the number of the structure and color, the more it keeps the original state of the area opposed to the source area. But for some cases, there's nothing better than good old stamp tool. But I'm going to show you how to implement more tactics while you're working with it. For example, to remove this line, I'm going to choose my sample by holding Alt and click. Make sure that your clone stamp is set to current and below. And then I make my first click here with mouse to stamp it. Then I hold Shift and click at other end of this bright line. This way it creates a perfectly straight line between my 2 clicks, and now my line is removed. Let's remove this person on a bike. If you use just clone stamp, it will be really hard not to brush over the model on this photo. To prevent this from happening, I need to create a selection. Let's hit CTRL+Z to undo. The easiest way to do that is to use a quick selection tool. So I just brush over this area where my person on a bicycle is. It's also a good idea to check sample all layers. That's why it didn't work. And drag and select again. Here you go. If it selected too much, that's okay. Just hold Alt key and paint over the areas that you want to unselect, and this way it will be subtracting from the selection. And now when I clone, I only work within my selection and it doesn't affect the girl. Hit CTRL+D to deselect and continue working on this part of the door, removing my person. When you work with clone stamp, you can also experiment with its opacity. For example, these really bright areas, I don't want to remove completely, but I'd rather tone them down. So I changed the opacity of clone stamp by hitting 5 on my keypad for 50% opacity. I zoom in and I paint over. So when I paint over this bright area, notice how it also clones brick pattern and covers these dark windows. To fix that, let me hit CTRL+Z to undo and create a new layer. And I'm going to put my layer into the darken mode and try again. See how it now affects only the bright areas that I want to tone down. Let's see the before and after. Working with blending modes can be very helpful when retouching. Let's take a look at our next example. Here I have these white wires that I'd like to remove to create an illusion that butterflies are flying around her head. And because they are white and the background is dark, it's probably a good idea to work in darkened mode to only affect these bright areas. So again, I'm creating a separate blank layer and putting it into the darken mode. Instead of changing blending modes of each one of my tools, I'd rather have the whole layer in darken mode and use several different tools on it or decide which one is better choice as I go. I'm going to try and remove these wires starting with spot healing brush. While working with spot healing brush, make sure again that you have sample all layers checked. The great thing about Photoshop tools is that once you set them the way you want, like sample all layers, it then stays this way and you don't have to check every time to use the tool, but still it's good to double check. Here's another way to implement blending modes when retouching. I really don't like this bright area behind the tree. So instead of trying and spending a lot of time cloning or using healing brush, I'm going to utilize what I already have in frame. And I have another side of the image that's already dark. So I'm going to take rectangular marquee tool, select the area here, then click on the background layer, hit CTRL+J to create a copy based on my selection, take my move tool, move it to this side of the image, hit CTRL+T for free transformation, right click on the mouse for a pop-up menu, and here I choose flip horizontal and click OK. And now I'm going to put this layer into the darken mode. And now all I need to do is to mask the edges and these butterflies. So I apply a mask by hitting this icon down here. Take a brush with black color because black color hides. Make sure that my hardness is 0% and just paint over. I still have some of the bright areas left because I masked butterflies, and that's okay. To fix that, I will hit CTRL+T again for free transformation, and now stretch it a little bit like this. Okay. And brush again. Maybe change the opacity of the brush to blend it even more. I switch to black color by hitting X on my keypad. So I just go back and forth to refine my mask. Let's click my layer on and off to see the before and after by hitting this eye icon right here. and I think it looks good now. Here is another example of using blending modes and transformation for retouching. On this image, I'd like to fill in some of these spots with more flowers. You can of course do it by simply cloning, but let's see how we can utilize more blending modes. Let's create a blank layer, take our clone stamp, opacity 100%, and let's first try it in normal mode. So I hit Alt, select the source, and I stamp my flowers. And as I paint, I need to be mindful of other flowers around and careful not to cover them. That's where changing the blending mode can be very helpful. Because my flowers are much brighter than these spots that I was painting over, I'm going to put them into the lighten mode. And let's see how it works. And let's see the before and after. Let's again select our source and paint in more flowers. And because I work in the lighten mode, I can just simply stamp in new flowers without worrying that I need to be careful and not to stamp on existing flowers, covering them up. Let's see the before and after. Sometimes the concept of covering things up with other pixels can literally mean to utilize copy and transform what you already have in frame. And it can really sometimes help you speed up the workflow and simplify the process of retouching. Let's take a closer look at the flower with an eye. You can see that eyeball was glued and there's some of that glue left around and the eyeball doesn't quite fit the flower center. To quickly fix that, I'm going to take elliptical marquee tool, select the eye, also holding space keybar to move my selection around and fit the eye. Select my background layer, hit CTRL+J to create a copy, then CTRL+T for free transformation, and scale my eye to cover up all the situation around it. Okay, and now we're done. Another example of stealing a piece from the image and transforming it to cover things up. Let's take a look at this photo. Well, first, I'd like to get rid of all these bright spots that I think are unnecessary and distracting. So I'm going to repeat the same steps. I'm going to create a separate blank layer, select spot healing brush, and quickly go over them. Let's see the before and after. I really believe by doing this, I make my image look much neater. Next, I want to remove this sign plate here. You can of course try using a healing brush. Let's try it out. Well, it doesn't quite blend. I also reached this tree part and stamped it. And on this example, we also need to be mindful of the difference in depth of field and a very specific swirly bokeh blur. This means that I need to be careful about selecting the source area, and it just might turn out like too much work. In this case, I feel like it would be much easier to just steal a piece from the left side, mirror, and cover the sign with it. Plus, it will allow us to keep and maintain the swirly bokeh effect. Let's hit CTRL+Z to undo. So I click on the background layer, grab rectangular marquee tool, select this area right here, CTRL+J, move it, transform it and flip it horizontally, maybe stretch a little bit. Okay, apply the mask and smooth out the edges of this piece. I really believe this way is much faster and we don't need to worry about the depth of field or swirly bokeh effect. Let's do the same thing with the top right corner. So I'm repeating the same steps over and over again. I select the area, I create a copy, I move it and I mirror it, stretch it a little bit, and mask it. To make these two corners less identical, I'm going to lower the opacity and brush over a few times to make them just a slightly bit different. Let's see the before and after. On this image, I'd like to remove this boat and replace the door with some windows like here. You might say, let's try something like content overfill, and I will talk about it a little bit later, but let's quickly try it out. So I select the area, go to content overfill, and here on the preview, well, no, didn't work out quite well. So I say cancel, deselect. In this case, much simpler and faster way would be to steal a piece from here and just flip it. So let's do that. I select, create a copy, transform it, flip it, move it to this side, apply a mask, transform it and stretch a little bit more to cover things up. And we're good to go. To replace the door with the windows, I'm going to do the same thing. Before making a copy of your selection, let's not forget to click on the background layer. But then you might stop me and say, well, the color doesn't match. Yes, but we can easily fix that. I'm going to apply hue saturation adjustment layer because I want to work non-destructively. To access adjustment layers, you need to go to the layer menu and click on this icon. Here are adjustment layers. So I select hue saturation. And now I need to create a clip and mask, meaning I need to clip my hue saturation layer to the layer with the windows to apply it only to them specifically. So I click on this square with an arrow icon. And then I just change the hue and saturation and play with lightness. Let's proceed to our next example. As the introduction to this class says, there are multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, and I couldn't agree more. So I would like to show you different options and possibilities that you might not think about before. If the area that you need to alter and adjust doesn't have to be in a very specific way, meaning it would be okay to, let's say, stretch it like here, I can do this. To remove this person, I'm going to first of all make a layer copy, again because I want to work non-destructively. Then simply select this whole area, like this, without touching our main subject. Hit CTRL+T and just simply stretch until the person disappears. Same thing I want to do with this piece of a stroller, but I don't need to stretch this whole side, so I will use liquify. I go to Filter, Liquify, and with Warp tool, I'm just going to move the pixels beyond the frame. Let's see the before and after. Sometimes it's good to check if you have other photos that you can steal a piece from to cover things up. Well, I doubt there's any photographer who ever takes just one single shot during the photo shoot. So in this image, I have this person that I want to remove. And luckily, I have another shot from this location taken from the same spot and just a few minutes apart. So I can just open it up. Select this area with no person, take Move tool, and just drag this piece onto the photo. To be able to see where I need to place it, I need to be able to see what's underneath. So I'm going to change the opacity of the layer by hitting 5 on my keypad, changing my opacity to 50%, and then CTRL+T for free transformation. And now I see that I need to scale it down a little bit. So I do that. And now I can see where exactly I need to place my new layer, somewhere like that. Okay, bring opacity back to 100%, apply mask. And smooth out the edges. If I brushed away a little bit extra right here, that's okay. I hit X to change to white color and brush it back. Let's talk about content or web fill. I need to remove these people. To use content aware, you need to create a selection first. It can be pretty loose and doesn't have to be tight. Then I go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And it takes us to this workspace. And here you can see this green overlay that Photoshop automatically selected as a source and a preview showing how it's going to look like. We can customize it and add or remove the areas that we want or don't want Photoshop to use. And it will update in the preview as you go. On the right, here are also settings that you can play with. And sometimes it works perfectly from the first try. Sometimes it gives us a good starting point that we might need to tweak later on. Then you need to choose your output setting, and I recommend outputting it to a new layer. Okay, and deselect. Let's do the same thing with this person right here. So on the preview, you can see that it took a piece of a plane right here. So we need to remove it from the source area by using a brush with a minus. And now it updated, looks okay, and I click OK. And like I already said, sometimes it gives us a good starting point, so you can grab something like healing brush and tweak it and go over a little bit. Or a clone stamp with low opacity. And go over a few times. Just like that. And last but not least, let's take this photograph and try fixing it by using content-aware fill. I want to fill in this spot here and cover up this whole area on top with more branches. So first I select the area that I want to fill in, edit content-aware, deselect the areas that I don't want to be involved. You can also reset this green overlay completely by hitting custom and select the source areas yourself manually. I think it looks good now. Okay. And you can see how content aware creates a separate layer on top with my generated pixels. So it's very helpful because we can adjust them and mask them if we don't like something. Now let's select this whole area up here. I missed a spot here, that's okay. I hold Shift to add to my selection. And go to Edit Content Aware Fill. And again, if you don't want to select the source area yourself, you can click on Auto, and Photoshop will automatically generate a patch. Let me zoom in the preview by enlarging the window with the preview. Not so bad, but we can also play and experiment with the settings. So you can play with color adaptation, rotation, scale, and mirror. So let's do that. Let's set our rotation to medium. It warns us that the results will change. That's okay. I don't want this window to show again. My preview is updating. Then let's try and use scale. And I just experiment until I get decent results. Let's maybe try and set our rotation adaptation to high and see how it turns out. No, looks weird. So let's go back to medium. I think it's a pretty good result, so I'm going to click OK. I think content-aware fill gave us a great starting point to tweak and alter and adjust further on. A quick bonus tip. This next tip is for advanced users and for people familiar with the concept of frequency separation. If you're not familiar with it at all, we are having a class, Frequency Separation for Beginners by Lisa Carney here at Photoshop Summit, so check it out. So I'm not going to talk about what it is and how to work with it in detail. If you are familiar with this technique, you've probably seen it's being used mostly for retouching the skin. So today I wanted to quickly show you how you can apply frequency separation for editing other things. Here on this photograph, I have this giant teapot prop that could use a little bit of work. So first of all, it needs a better shape. So I'm going to create a layer copy and use Liquify. So I'll go to Filter, Liquify. Zoom in. And with Warp Tool, I'm going to give this teapot a better shape. Looks pretty good, so I click OK. Much better, but it's still all creased and blotchy. To fix it with cloning and healing brush would be very challenging and take a lot of work. So I'm going to use frequency separation just the way you would do it on the skin. First of all, I need to create my layer set. So I do 2 layer copies. I need to rename them. The first copy I'm going to name low and the second copy high. So now I need to blur my low copy by applying Gaussian blur. So I click on it, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I set the radius let's say 5 pixels radius. Then click on high, go to image, apply image. Now here, because I currently work in 8-bit, I choose the layer low. Make sure that your invert checkbox is unchecked. I change the blending mode to subtract, change my scale to 2, and offset to 128. And click OK. Now I need to put this layer into linear light blending mode, and I'm going to group my layers. Let's name it frequency separation. So if we take a closer look at our image and click this group on and off, we can see that nothing changed. But basically we broke our image into 2 frequencies. Low is where our color and shape is, and high is where the texture is. So now I can retouch them separately. I click on the low, make a copy of it. For non-destructive editing, I'm going to turn high layer off for now and start retouching. For frequency separation, I really love working with mixer brush. And by the way, for the mixer brush, we're also having 2 tutorials here at Photoshop Summit by Sebastian Michaels, so check them out too. For the mixer brush settings, I have load the brush after each stroke unselected and clean the brush after each stroke selected. I prefer to work with lower wet percentage and lower flow. And basically, I smudge and blend my shape without worrying about the texture. I smudge and blend all the uneven shadows and highlights, all the creases, all the spots, all the blotchiness. You can use here pretty much any tool like clone stamp and healing brush. Let's turn our high layer back on. To fix the remaining texture, I create a copy of high layer, clip it, This way I can see the texture much better. Then I create a new layer, clip it as well. I'm going to use it for retouching. I'm changing the blending mode of my main high layer copy back to normal. Click on blank layer, zoom in, and retouch some of these creases and texture. I'm going to use clone stamp. Okay, I think it's good enough. So let's turn our high copy off and bring the high layer back to linear light. Control 0 to fit the window view. Let's see the before and after. And we're done. You can spend a little bit more time refining and tweaking and making your retouching a little bit better. But I think we're having a pretty good result here, and it didn't take me too much time. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my tutorial. Feel free to follow and reach out to me on social media, Instagram Anya_Anti_art and Facebook Anya Anti Art.